Let's see, I have my marker here with soon be about a third of the way down the
Okay,
page.
what's the first one?
In class.
Okay, 1 second.
Started.
Okay, fine. Okay, so the discussion over there is basically where is the Mishnah says that Akko is the northern border for Israel as it pertains to the question of the Fun and Efra. Sumar says that maybe Akko wasn't the most northern city. It was actually Kiziv, and there was a Ritzua. So Ritzua is sort of a ridgeline that connects the two cities. It's sort of an intuitive border that links the two. So the Gemara says we're at
7B.
Oh yes, but where? That's the question.
It's somewhere.
We'll be at Amar Abaya. So that would be about a third of the way down. First one would be Abaya. So Amar Abaya Ritzua Nafka. There is this connection between Akko and Ziv and this Ritzua. Ritzua is like an intuitive ridgeline, where that's what connects. That's the linkage. Like like an example I gave before is the gerrymander district, right? Where you want to connect two populations, so you link them with like one little street.
Run 7B or 8A?
7B.
7B. And the first word on the line is
In Crow.
ain.
In.
Ain?
You
say potato, I say potato.
Okay. So the Gemara says, "V'yav Tana Siman Hachi." Is this the simon that the author of the Mishnah would give? In other words, would it use the Ritzua as connecting the border towns? In other words, where we find here that Kziv is part of Israel, it's only part of it through this Ritzua. So the Gemara says, yeah, it is the case. In Konami Yav Simano, Kziv Yemru Hitnech Hashem B'Shilai. Yommi Yamina Hashem Mitzvayna LeBeis El Mizrach Hashem Hashem Mesil Ha'olam Beis El Shkama. So if you look at the little photo they have on the left side of the page, in the Rashi, you'll see that there's a Mesila that connected Shem to Beis El. And the verse specifically mentions that it was connected through a Mesila. Mesila is a similar idea to a Ritzua, where there's this, there's this land feature that intuitively connects two cities. Papa says, that these are the cities of Sheila are to the east of this Mesila, this ridgeline. Okay, now get to an interesting discussion, and this will take us, a little bit in other places. We spoke about the requirement to say the Farnechta. And if you're in Israel, you do need to say it. If you're not in Israel, you don't need to say it. What happens if someone's on a boat in a river in Israel and he writes divorce on the boat? Does he need to say the Farnechta or not? Now, I don't know that there are that many rivers in Israel. There are a couple. There are three that feed the Kinneret. And there's the Jordan that connects Kinneret to the. And I'm not familiar with any other ones that are. There's the Ayalon, I guess, and there's the one in what's the river that goes to Haifa? It's another river. That is done, and the third one also.
Something like that. There's another river up there.
Yeah, Rock also feeds the Kinneret. All those two feed the Kinneret.
It's also
I don't know what boat you could.
What was that?
You could be on a raft.
Yeah. I don't know if you get about, but although the Jordan River before the Kinneret was much higher.
This could be along the Mediterranean.
So we'll get to that.
Oh, okay.
For now, we're talking about rivers.
Oh, okay.
And there are two or three other rivers that feed the coastal waters. Is the Ayalon in Tel Aviv, and then there's another one in Haifa. I can't remember the name. These are larger rivers.
The one in Tel Aviv is
Polluted.
oh boy,
They're both polluted.
it's like a poster child for the super.
Yeah, and the one in Haifa is worse.
I knew you fall into that one. That's like I don't almost guarantee a trip to the hospital. So the guy's on the boat in the river. So the Gemara says, Tanachah, the one author says, Hamei get bisfina.
someone who brings the divorce on a boat in the river, can maybe Eretz Yisrael. It's like he's in Eretz Yisrael. Another opinion is can maybe b'chutz la'aretz. It's like he wrote it in the chutz la'aretz. There seems to be a contradiction. So what's the differentiating factor? Rabbi Yomi says it's not difficult. Rabbi Yehudah, one is Rabbi Yehudah, one is the opinion of the Rabban, which now we learned. If you have earth from chutz la'aretz outside of Eretz Yisrael, that comes on a boat to Eretz Yisrael. So you have a boat, and I guess somebody put soil on the bottom of the boat, and he started growing things in the boat. Anyway, the question is chayiv and ma'aser shvius. The boat is now in Israel. So the rabbis say it is. It's in Israel. Yehudah says no. It depends. Ein Messiah. When is this true? Bisman shasfina gesheshas. So this is you talking about one of these shallow rivers, like the northern ones. So if the boat is touching the floor, touching the surface, not the surface, the riverbed, so then you be chayiv in ma'aser. Then you be chayiv. If it's not gosheshas, but if the boat is sort of floating the way it's supposed to be and not dragging on the riverbed, so then potter it's exempt from ma'aser. Okay, so it's a very interesting comparison because you'd think that the requirement of lishma for a divorce would be somewhat different than the requirement to determine that a food is chayiv ma'aser or not. Although
Why is that?
You mean what? What? You mean why is it the same? Why is it comparable? Yeah, it was. I don't know. Comparison sort of is weak, and the Gemara eventually falls off the comparison because the Gemara recognizes that it's not really fair to compare a question that is dependent on the frequency of travel or lishma, the knowledge of the bezin, to a law of ma'aser. Although the fact that another concept that's used to define Eretz Yisrael would be used in comparison to another sort of sort of a comparison of abstract. This is the definition of Eretz Yisrael in this context, so this is what it should be in that context, is not unheard of in the Gemara, even if the underlying reason is indeed different. Because it could be that they say that they took a less dynamic view of Mitzvah and L'Kaim and Lishma. They said it's going to be like Israel for whatever Israel is, even though technically speaking, maybe in terms of the need of this decree, it was a little different. They'll use an existing definition of Israel. Okay, let's continue. Sabai Amar Abai says, Havaha Rabbi Yehudah. I'm sorry. Amar Rabbi Yehudah, like Hashem. Rabbi Yehudah Harabon. Okay, some second. No, I'm sorry. Abai says it's not difficult. It could be Rabbi Yehudah. But like Hashem, the explanation of two brides is if he wrote the divorce while the boat was touching the riverbed, so then it's gesheshus, and therefore you're chayiv and ma'aser. If it's not touching the riverbed, so then it's not gesheshus, and therefore it's like chutz la'aretz. Amar Bzera, the following question: Otzitz nakav hamunach lagabe yisaydis. Ono machlokes Yehudah v'Rabbanan. So this is a famous discussion throughout all the Gemaras that relate to the topic of Zeron, planting. You can have a otzitz nakav or otzitz she'ein nakav. A otzitz nakav is a flower pot with a hole in it. A flower pot with a hole in it is considered to be yonik. I'm not sure how to do. Yonik literally means to nurse, sort of connected to the ground. A otzitz she'ein nakav is considered not connected to the ground. So just as one example, if you have what do you call it? If you have a garden, and this is what people do in Israel during Shemitah, some of the farmers will lay out like thick plastic. They'll dig out a hole, they'll lay over with very thick plastic. It's typically more like garden-sized plots for vegetables, and they will fill it with soil and plant in it. That's permitted, as long as the plants don't overhang the plastic. So in other words, you have to make sure the plastic is not only in the pit, but it's also well outside the pit. This way, even though it grows, nothing is going to go over the plastic. So now it's considered separated from what's it called, from the ground. Now, what happens if you have a flower pot on top of a concrete floor? So there, we're taught. So it depends on the type of the surface of the floor, but most places will say that if the flower pot has a hole, then it's gonna be gained. It's considered part of the ground, and therefore, if you had a flower pot with a hole, you wouldn't be able to cut it on Shemitah. On concrete, yeah. So, and the question is what about other surfaces, and that's a discussion for a different day. Okay. But I would have loved to have you discussion. Speaking of discussions for another day, there's some great Gemaras yesterday that I missed, including the Gemara about music being prohibited, which is an interesting topic, and also the Gemara of, with Rabbi Lazar. Rabbi Lazar wanted to tattle on somebody who's giving him a hard time. It's a very interesting Gemara. The place can say from there that was specifically because he was only bothering Rabbi Lazar. That's why Rabbi Lazar was not allowed to report him. But somebody who's a mazik as a rabbin is allowed to be reported. Somebody who's bothering or who's stealing from or damaging a group of people could be reported. It's interesting thing the person can bring from that Gemara. Okay. Anyway, let's continue here so I not get too sidetracked. Okay. So now we have the question of the otzes knockoff. So you have an otzes knockoff pot with a hole in it. That's put on top of they have those things that lift up the flower pot. Yeah, like they have those tripod things that can hold flower pots on an elevated position. Mm-hmm. So the question is as follows: do you say that the ear that's underneath the tripod is that connected to the ground or not? In other words, does a flower pot have to be directly on the ground? What happens if it's ear in between? So the Gemara says, Amar of Zera. It's say this. You have a flower pot with a hole that's put on top of pins or pegs. It seems to be the same debate as Yehudah and the Rabbanon. In other words, the Rabbanon say that if it's on a boat in Israel, even though it's not touching the floor, it's considered part of Israel. And Yehudah says only if it's touching the floor on the boat. So presumably, Rabbi Yehudah would say that if there's some ear between the flower pot and the ground, then it is not part of Israel. It's considered like a. Whereas the rabbis would say that in both cases it is connected to the ground. Rava says no. Dilma it's not the case. It is only the case. Rabbi Yehudah only made a statement. By boat. Why? Because a boat moves both directions, different directions. Therefore, it has to be touching the ground for it to be considered connected to the ground. But a whole flower pot with a hole in it is not like that. Inami, alternatively. The rabbis only said this with regard to a boat, it does not have that the sort of the water is not in between. In other words, the water is considered like the surface of this, like the seabeds. The water is not considered a separation. However, with regard to because we see the water as sort of a thick riverbed. The water is considered part of the ground itself, and therefore it's considered directly connected. But a flower pot. Where there's, if you put it on top of pegs, and now you have an ear in between the pot and the floor, maybe not. Okay. Now we get to another very interesting discussion. Rav Nachman says, "Benor is Eretz Yisrael b'kulam v'lo pligi." Okay, so now the Gemara is making a major change here. Until now, I said to you that we're talking specifically about the rivers, right? Jules mentioned the Mediterranean. I said, no, we're not going to talk about the Mediterranean. Now we'll talk about the Mediterranean. Now we'll talk about the Mediterranean. So until now, we're talking about rivers inside of Israel. And you said there aren't that many rivers, but there are a couple of rivers, and that was the question. Now we'll move to the Mediterranean. So in other words, with regard to the rivers, there's no debate. and everyone agrees that the rivers are like Eretz Yisrael. You're inside of Israel, you're part of Israel, you have the same laws as being in Israel. In the Mediterranean. The Tanya we learned, Ezu Aretz v'Ezu Chutz La'aretz. What's considered Eretz Yisrael? What's considered outside of Eretz Yisrael? Kol shefei v'yered miturei amnin. So the north. Okay, so the Gemara here talks about biblical Israel. Biblical. We said there's a number of ways to define Israel, right? Biblical Israel are the borders of Israel that are written out in Parshas Masei. And the Chumash Bamidbar Torah says the northern part of Israel is the mountains of Amnon. This is also a location called Har HaHar. This is somewhere well north of Israel. It's in I believe it's in modern day Lebanon. It might even go further into Turkey or something, or Syria, on the northwestern side of the country. So Turi Amen these are mountains that adjut the coast. So the bottom city is a city called Kafluria. I don't know exactly the English location, maybe the Arsenal translation, maybe not, I don't know. Kafluria is the city that's at the foot of the mountains of Amnon. Now, the southwestern border of Israel is a river called Nachal Mitzrayim, the Egyptian river. The Egyptian river flows from the Mediterranean to an area, let's say the opposite. It flows from someplace in Israel, which is north of Eilat into the Mediterranean. Again, I'm not sure exactly where Nachal Mitzrayim is today. So basically, that is the borders in biblical Israel. The two other versions of Israel, which I think we might get to again in this Masechta, are what was conquered in the first conquest, which was when they entered Israel from Egypt. And the second definition of Israel is what they conquered, what they acquired or conquered in the second campaign when they returned to Israel after 7 years of exile in Bavel. Okay. All right. So the Gemara here is talking about biblical Israel. So what's the question? The Tanya we learn Ezu Aretz Ezu Chutz La'aretz. What is considered Eretz Yisrael? What's considered outside of Eretz Yisrael? Kol shefei v'yered. Anything that from the mountain of Har HaHar, you go from the summit southwards. Mitur Amnon Lefnim Eretz Yisrael. Mitur Amnon L'chutz U'michutz L'chutz Chutz La'aretz. So you draw a line through the summits, and that's the border. Hanis and Sheviyam, the islands that are in the river, that are in the sea, the Mediterranean Sea. You draw a line through the Mediterranean from the summit of Turi Amnon of Har HaHar till the mouth of the Egyptian river, Nachal Mitzrayim. And so basically, you're talking about any island which is roughly close to Israel. That would be part of Israel itself.
Yeah, here they think Mitzrayim is the Irish, Wadi al-Arish.
Wadi al-Arish, interesting.
Or another thing is the easternmost tributary of the Nile, so extending into Egypt.
Interesting. Okay, thank you. Appreciate it. Okay, so all these islands, these are part of Eretz Yisrael. So you have this sort of border that runs through the Mediterranean itself. Rabbi Yehudah says, very interesting. So Rabbi Yehudah says like this: you take a line. So the first opinion says, right, you have Israel like this. Try to. So you have Har HaHar here, you have Nachal Mitzrayim here. You draw a line like this. So it's a short sliver of the ocean, of the sea that's connected to Israel. Rabbi says no. The lines are drawn at lines of latitudes. So you look at the line of latitude of Wadi al-Arish and the line of latitude of Har HaHar, and you send them outward until the end of the universe, which is the Atlantic Ocean.
Oh, that's a good question. How does he explain that? How As the ruling explained.
Create a fire.
Uh,
Over territory.
It's an entire separate question. Until the Atlantic Ocean, any river, any I don't know if Malta's in that area. Cyprus might be within that latitude. I'm not sure though. Any island that's within those latitudes, from again, so the lines, instead of drawing as a connecting line, there are lines that are drawn infinity, right? Basically until the Atlantic. That's considered our Yisrael. Shinemar Gvul Yam.
Yeah, that's in.
Oh,
Okay, I'm not sure why I drew it at an angle, but okay.
I don't know. There's someone just sent this out.
It's I've seen that picture. It's baffling.
Okay, so the
Foundation for the conclusion. I don't get it.
okay, so the Shinemar, because Gvul Yam v'hayalachem hayam ugvul hayam hagadol ugvul zayilachem Gvul Yam. Okay, so the Yam Hagadol of the Mediterranean itself is the Gvul Yam, the western border. So in other words, the fact that the Mediterranean is the border means that inside the Mediterranean, all these islands are included. The islands that are on the sides. The islands that are not against the latitudes. So you see the line drawn from the area of Kafluria, which is at the base of Har until the Atlantic Ocean. And from the river of Egypt until the Mediterranean, until the Atlantic Ocean. Anything that's the same latitude, Eretz Yisrael. Anything that's outside of that line is considered outside of Israel. Again, this is only for islands. If it's a landmass, then it's not included. So the Gemara says, according to the rabbi's position, what's included by the Gvul Yam? In other words, one second. It says the Yam Hagadol will be the border. What's included by defining the Yam Hagadol as the border? The Gemara says, it's that tells me that there is even a concept that an island is included. The way they define an island is drawing a line, alongside Israel, sort of parallel to the country, as opposed to drawing these lines at latitudes. So the Gemara says, Rabbi Yehudah Nisan Loitzrich Krai. Rabbi Yehudah says that Rabbi Yehudah doesn't think that the islands should need a pasuk. And basically, according to this opinion, Shaka say 7, right? Shaka say 7 o'clock, right?
yes, go to me.
What's going on?
Okay.
He got upset. He's leaving.
So according to the Rabbanon, the definition of an island is a line that's drawn parallel to Israel. A boat that's inside that area is going to be inside of Israel. If it's outside that area, it's outside of Israel. And according to Rabbi Yehudah, it would be defined by lines of latitudes. Okay. And Rabbi Yehudah used the word gvul to define the borders differently than the Rabbanon. Okay, Rav Meir says, Akka Eretz Yisrael. Akka is like Eretz Yisrael. By my name, Rav Chia Barabba. Rav Chia Barabba was asked the following question: after the Surya, okay, so we mentioned this before. We'll mention it again today. There's an area called Syria. Modern day Syria is probably roughly around where this area is. David HaMelech made a number of campaigns to conquer that area, and most of the reason was for financial reasons, to have more land, more area to farm, etc. Somebody who sells his slave to Syria, is it like selling his slave to outside of Israel or not? What's the rule? If you take a slave, this is an Evet Kanani, right? So he's he's quasi-Jewish. He's Jewish, but he has the same rules as a woman. But if you sell him outside of Israel, he has a right to say, I want to live in Israel, and he goes free. Basically, you can't sell him outside of Israel. And if you do sell him outside of Israel, then he goes free. So the question is, what if he sells him in Syria? What's the rule? So they said to him, Tanisua, we learned, Meir says, Aka Eretz Yisrael Gittin. Aka is like Eretz Yisrael for the laws of Gittin. The Gittin in, specifically for Gittin, la'avodim loy, but with regard to selling a slave, he would go free if you sold him in Akko. The Kolshkin Syria Demrach Ketuva, and certainly Syria, which is even further than that. Where if you sell a slave to Syria, it's like selling him outside of Israel and he goes free. And now the Gemara continues the discussion of Syria. There are three ways which Syria is like Eretz Yisrael, and three ways which is like outside of Israel, diaspora. And those things are, and the Gemara will explain them. After a tamei, the earth is tamei, kichutz like being outside of Israel. Someone who sells a slave, it's like he sold them outside of Israel. Maybe get me Syria, maybe mechutz laaretz. Someone who brings a divorce, it's as if he brought it outside of Israel. In other words, he needs to say b'fan nechtam. And in three ways, it's similar to Israel. Chayeves b'maiser b'shvius. You're chayev for maiser and shvius. Eretz Yisrael, like Eretz Yisrael itself. This seems to contradict the first one. So previously we said it's similar to the diaspora because it's tamei, but someone whose Torah wants to enter is allowed to enter. So the Gemara explains it's sort of in between. The ground outside of Israel, we say the ground and the air is tamei. See, the rabbis gave a tumah to being outside of Israel. Why is a separate discussion. However, with regard to Syria, they said the ground is tamei, but not the air. So it means if you don't touch the ground, you're on a vehicle, you don't become tamei. It's only if you're walking on the ground, then you become tamei, tumas eretz am. Okay. It's like the fanciest neighborhood in Jerusalem. Buying land in Syria is just as important as buying land in Jerusalem. Okay. So the Gemara says, Chayeves b'maiser b'shviyas Eretz Yisrael. It's chayev in 1 second. Okay. It's chayev in maiser and shmita like Eretz Yisrael. Why? Because savar kibush shochet shmei kibush. So the question here is the campaign of David HaMelech to conquer Syria was sort of a personal campaign for financial reasons, and the question is whether that is sufficient for something to become part of Israel. Typically, even though it's part of biblical Israel, Syria is within biblical Israel borders. However, do we say that biblical Israel borders were conquered for the purpose of becoming part of Israel by all the tribes? It was a wide-ranging campaign. Or do we say that whereas David HaMelech, the campaign was sort of for the king, and the king ordered them to battle. It wasn't like they went to battle because they necessarily wanted to go. We learned in insight that this was considered a voluntary war. It wasn't considered an obligatory war because they were conquering it for financial reasons. So does that make it part of the land or not? So according to this opinion, it does, because kibush shochet shmei kibush, and therefore you have to bring trumas maasros. B'tahara nichnas. Someone who wants to go in b'tahara nichnas. Someone who doesn't want to become tamei is still allowed to walk into Syria. So the Gemara says, what do you mean? Va'amet after tamei. You said that the ground is tamei. The Gemara says, b'shita teva migdal. You're in a box or you're in a wagon, a vehicle or something. Tanya, we learned Tanechnas Aretz Am b'shita teva migdal. Rabbi Mitam, Rabbi Yehudah Mitar. There's a debate between Rabbi and Rabbi Yehudah if you're inside a vehicle and you're outside of Israel, if you become tamei. Rabbi says that the afilu Rabbi like a matami ela ba'aretz am the gazra gusha ve'alavira. even Rebbe that says you become Tameh outside of Israel, even if you're in a vehicle, that's only because they decreed that both the ground and the ear has the Tumah. Avol Surya al Gusha Gazru, al Avira Lay Gazru. But in Syria, they only decreed the land itself is Tameh and not the ear. And therefore, if you're in a vehicle, you're not Tameh. Okay. Now, someone who buys land in Syria, Yerushalayim. It's like you bought land in a fancy neighborhood in Jerusalem. So what does that mean? What difference does it make to us? You're allowed to write a document of sale even on Shabbos. So the Gemara asks, you're not allowed to write on Shabbos. So the Gemara says Shabbos, you're not allowed to write on Shabbos. The Gemara says, you're allowed to tell a non-Jew to write a document on Shabbos. Even though typically the rule is that the rabbis forbade you to get your things done on Shabbos by asking a guy. You can't just ask a guy to do anything that you want on Shabbos. Because of making a residence in Eretz Yisrael, the rabbis did not make this decree. Okay, in other words, if you have a non-Jew that owns land in Israel and you convince him to sell it, and this probably would be true today, you're allowed to ask a non-Jew to write up the document even on Shabbos.
Where is this?
If you're acquiring land in Israel, we want to make sure, okay, that Israel is owned by Jews only and not by non-Jews. And therefore, if you're acquiring land from non-Jews, which effectively is redeeming it from oppression, you might want to say. So you're allowed, that document can be written on Shabbos. You can even, obviously a Jew can't write it, but a Jew can ask a non-Jew to write it even on Shabbos. That's
I'm
sorry? I believe that's the case today as well.
Wow.
So if you convince an Arab to, Arabs who sell land to Jews, you don't have it to them.
Yeah. Well, they better go into a witness protection program.
Yeah, otherwise they'll be killed,
Yeah.
Executed. Arabs are, yeah. There is one way to do it. The only way to do it is if the house collapses. So some of the Arabs make their house collapse and bring themselves to a Jew. Anyway, in either case, to redeem land from a non-Jew is very important, and that's true with regard to Syria as well. Tanur Rabbanan, the rabbis taught. Eved Shehevi Gittin. Okay, so we'll learn in Tractate Gittin. It's a nice section. We'll get to it. I think it's in. Where is it? It's in. It's in Hashalach. I get to it in about a month. It's a big section Gittin that deals with slavery, indentured servants. These are non-Jews that became quasi-Jewish. They're Jewish slaves. This is not Eved Ivri. Eved Ivri is a different concept. We're talking about Eved Kanani here. Now, if you're allowed to free an Eved Kanani, I shouldn't say you're allowed to. There is a way to free slave, to free an Eved Kanani. Whether you're allowed to or not is a separate question. Could be you're not allowed to free a non-Jewish slave. Once you've acquired him as a slave, you have to keep him as a slave. Now, regardless, if you have okay, now there is a way to free a non-Jewish slave. There's a number of ways. The most common way is to write him a document that says he's freed. That document is often called a get. They call it a get shechor. First of all, the word get is used for every document. Now, if you're talking about a specific type of document that's divorce, the get that divorces a husband and wife, and the get that sort of lets a slave man become a free man, those are most commonly specifically referred to as a get. Okay, stop there. I'll continue this more tomorrow. Okay.